and author of Socialist Feminism, A New Approach. I am also a proud member of PEN America. I would like to first thank Steve Hargadon and the entire Library 2.0 staff and Kali Akers, our volunteer staff member, for organizing this mini conference. I would like to thank San Jose State's University School of Information for being a founding partner. And today I would like to speak to you about how feminism can help librarians confront authoritarianism in the 21st century. Can you all hear me well? Is my voice loud enough?
We're getting some yeses in the chat.
Okay, very good. So authoritarianism is on the rise on a global scale. In the US, and in the current increase in book bans and disinformation in the US are part of a broader rise of authoritarianism around the world. In the US, we've witnessed the January 6, 2021 white supremacist coup attempt promoted by President Donald Trump. We're facing increasing attacks on civil rights, reproductive rights, LGBTQ, and labor rights. In Russia, we've seen the Putin government's criminalization of dissent and its genocidal invasion of Ukraine, which continues in horrific ways. In China, we have an increasingly powerful surveillance state that's tightening control over the population and preventing any expressions of democratic dissent. In India, we have the government of Narendra Modi taking away civil rights, promoting Hindu nationalism. In Iran, where I'm from, we have a religious fundamentalist state that's arresting and killing thousands of young participants in the woman life freedom movement. Sudan's army coup in October 2021 has now turned into a war between army factions and a total war on the population. In Venezuela, any expression of dissent and demand for democratic rights is assaulted by the state and labeled counter-revolutionary. And I could go on and on and on. My point is that we need to see the assault on librarians and libraries in the US as part of this broader growing authoritarianism around the globe. And confronting these assaults begins with gaining a deep understanding of why authoritarianism is on the rise. In my book, Socialist Feminism, A New Approach, I've returned to a Marxian analysis of authoritarianism and argued that the capitalist mode of production itself facilitates authoritarianism. What I mean is that capitalism is not only limited to the private property of the means of production and the use of market mechanisms for organizing supply and demand. Capitalism as a mode of production takes away our control not only over the products of our labor, but the process of our labor. It alienates us from our work, from other human beings, and from our potential for critical thinking. It promotes the production of monetary value as an end in itself. It leads to human alienation as well as the concentration and centralization of capital in fewer hands. It stands in opposition to collective emancipation. Thus, capitalism facilitates authoritarianism both economically, socially, and politically. At the same time, authoritarianism in the 21st century has some important features which we need to understand. I argue that what distinguishes capitalism in the 21st century is not neoliberalism or the privatization of state enterprises and services, but rather monopoly and state capitalism, with the state having a much larger role in controlling and directing capital investment and the operation of companies. Monopoly and state capitalism are competing with each other for profit and power in what has come to be called a multipolar imperialism. Thus, the US and Europe are not the only imperialist powers in the world. China and Russia are also exerting their power as imperialist states and have currently formed an alliance. There are also regional imperialist powers such as Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and others around the world that have made alliances with one or another of these larger imperialist powers or power blocs. Connected to these phenomena is the reality of increasing mass incarceration, not only in the US, which currently has over 2 million people in prisons, jails, and detention centers, but also in China, Russia, Iran, Syria, Egypt, Turkey, Myanmar, and elsewhere. 21st century authoritarianism is also characterized by a backlash against progress in gender relations, an assault on women's abortion and reproductive rights, and an assault on LGBTQ rights. All of these characteristics of 21st century authoritarianism are also strengthened by another feature, the growth of disinformation, the lack of reflection, the growth of confusion. Now, let's see how some feminists have analyzed these phenomena. Grace Blakely, a British feminist economist and author of the book Corona Crash, How the Pandemic Will Change Capitalism, has analyzed the global increase in state capitalism after the pandemic. She traces this phenomenon back to the aftermath of the 2008 economic crisis. She writes, quote, "What has happened as a result of 2008 and 2020 is that both financial and now also non-financial institutions, in other words, the entirety of the monopoly finance hybrid, have collapsed into the arms of the state and appear set to become wholly and permanently reliant upon it." That's the end of the quote from Grace Blakely. Rohini Hensman, a Sri Lankan Indian labor and feminist writer and author of the book Indefensible, points out the multipolar character of imperialism as a key feature of authoritarianism in the 21st century. She analyzes and condemns imperialist interventions, not only when promoted by Western countries, but also when promoted by countries from the East and the global South, such as China, Russia, and their allies. When it comes to mass incarceration, Black feminist intersectional thinkers have been in the forefront of offering analyses in the US. Angela Davis and Ruth Wilson Gilmore have theorized the relationship between capitalist crises, globalization, racism, and what they call the prison industrial complex. They argue that the prison industrial complex is based on a system of social control. It is partially about profit extraction from the work of prisoners, partially a source of job creation for prison guards and for communities where prisons are built, and partially a means of breaking down people and enforcing domination. In the new Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness, Michelle Alexander, a US civil rights attorney and legal scholar, has categorized the disproportionate rate of imprisonment of African Americans as part of a new Jim Crow system of racial segregation and disenfranchisement in the US. While Davis, Gilmore, and Alexander focus on the US, other international feminists that I discussed in my book have singled out the connection between authoritarianism and mass incarceration in other parts of the world, such as China, Russia, Syria, Iran, Turkey, Egypt, and Israel in Palestinian occupied lands. Concerning the assault on reproductive and abortion rights, some important analyses have been offered by Jenny Brown, Katha Pollitt, Loretta Ross, and Ricky Solinger. In her book, Without Apology, The Abortion Struggle Now, labor activist and writer Jenny Brown offers a short history of the reproductive and abortion rights struggle, mostly with a focus on the US. Brown argues that the current assault on abortion rights is rooted both in the decline of the fertility rate and the fear of women's independence and sexuality. Another feminist author and poet, Katha Pollitt, offers an incisive analysis which challenges the very premise of the quote unquote pro-life movement. In her book, Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights, she argues, quote, the view that life begins at conception. I'm sorry, this is not a direct quote. This is my summary of the quote. The view that life begins at conception reduces women to mere vessels for carrying fetuses and gives a fetus a right to rent a woman's body without her consent, simply because a woman had sex. Pollitt further argues that the ability to determine the timing and number of children undergirds the modern ideal of egalitarian, intimate marriages based on love, companionship, and mutual sexual delight. It makes for marriages that are less rigidly role-bound and more democratic and better for children. It's the end of the quote from Pollitt. Human rights activist Loretta Ross and historian Ricky Solinger are also in agreement with this view. In their book, Reproductive Justice: An Introduction, they discuss the importance of the reproductive justice movement, which was started by African-American women. This movement confronts the assault on women and children that was launched by the right in the name of life and family values. The reproductive justice movement demands not only the right to choose abortion, but the right to have a child or not to have a child and live in dignity, free of class, racial, and gender discrimination, and with access to healthcare, education, and quality housing. So far, I've offered a summary of feminist analyses that deal with the nature of authoritarianism in the 21st century, from the vantage point of economics, geopolitics, social control, and gender. Another important aspect of authoritarianism addressed by feminists is the assault on the mind and education itself. When it comes to the growth of disinformation, unreflectiveness, and confusion that is so characteristic of the 21st century, the best and most relevant analysis for librarians is Marianne Wolf's Reader Come Home, published in 2018. Wolf is a professor of education and information studies at UCLA. She argues that, quote, as society becomes increasingly dependent on digital reading, fissures are appearing in our most sophisticated cognitive and emotional processes, from critical analysis and empathy to contemplation. Furthermore, in a milieu that continuously confronts us with a glut of information, the great temptation for many is to retreat to familiar silos of easily digested, less dense, less intellectually demanding information. End of quote from Wolf. While this latter point has been argued by many analysts who have commented on the dangers of social media, Wolf's argument about the impact of digital reading itself on the brain is new. She shows that whereas reading print mediums gives the brain more time to absorb the content and reflect on it, switching to full reliance on digital mediums changes the circuitry of the brain and makes us unreflective and unempathetic. And this is another very important point, that she draws a direct connection between reflection and empathy, that if we do not reflect, we cannot be empathetic. Changing this course, Woolf argues, demands a return to what she calls deep reading of great books of literature and philosophy to foster our ability to form analogies and inferences, and to develop the critical thinking, reflection, and empathy that is needed. This, she insists, cannot be done so long as digital mediums or screen reading constitute the bulk of reading. Reliance on print mediums is necessary in order to slow us down and make us reflect more on what we read. Furthermore, Woolf argues, this does not mean that we should abandon digital mediums. It means that we need to be as proficient in reading print mediums as we are in reading digital mediums, and be concerned not only about what we read, but how we read and why we read. Reading critically and with these questions in mind, in turn, she argues, demands having an overall humanist conceptual framework inculcated in human beings through a system of education that values science and the humanities. Black feminist scholars have contributed profoundly to the discussion on the type of education that is needed to confront authoritarianism, and precisely to the idea that Woolf is discussing. New York Times journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones and African-American studies professor Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor show that a system of education based on critical thinking and empathy in the US requires examining the legacy of the slavery and the legacy of slavery and the contributions of Black thinkers and activists. Nicole Hannah-Jones' 1619 project calls on us to examine the impact of the legacy of slavery on the US past and present. She asks us to reclaim true US history and act on that knowledge to promote social justice and reverse the effects of slavery. Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor's book, From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, offers a critical perspective and deep understanding of the historical circumstances, forces, and ideas that led to the Black Lives Matter movement, and focuses on why it is absolutely essential for any forward movement in the US. So how can these analyses help librarians confront authoritarianism? I hope that you are as inspired by these feminist analyses and contributions as I am. At a time when libraries and librarians are under assault, with book bans and various methods of censorship imposed by the extreme right, these analyses and ideas give us an idea of the bigger picture. They give us a perspective rooted in history, economics, and critical thinking. They give us ideas for collection development and programming that can promote critical thinking, empathy, and global understanding and solidarity. They encourage us to promote discussion and dialogue with the public and not shy away from that type of needed discussion and dialogue. Toward these aims, I'd like to offer the following guides for collection development and programming. First, a two-part webinar that I offered to the American Library Association's Reference and User Services Association last month. And it includes bibliographies on 8 different topics on collection development, on gender relations, and feminism in the 21st century. It includes study questions, key terms and concepts, and ideas for library programs. And especially because I'm a public librarian, I've included many ideas for public library programs. I also have a free study guide for my book, Socialist Feminism, A New Approach, that you can get from the website of Pluto Books, but I also have the website here on the PowerPoint. And then I, as a member of PEN America and co-chair of its translation committee, I've been involved in organizing a World Literature Speakers Bureau for public libraries. Here's the address, as you can see. And you can go to that address and pick a topic that you like. And our translators would be more than happy to speak to you via Zoom or in person if they live in the same city. And there's a variety of topics, and they're multicultural and global. And it really goes hand in hand with this project of promoting global understanding and solidarity, critical thinking, and empathy. So that's all I have to say for now. And I just wanted to end by saying that PEN America has also filed a lawsuit against the a school district in Florida. PEN America, along with Penguin Books, 5 authors and 2 parents, have filed a lawsuit against the school district in Florida for banning books on gender and anti-racism. And that's a really important effort, and I hope that you learn about it. Some states have already made it very difficult for librarians to live up to their mission of promoting truth, knowledge, and critical thinking. However, we still have a presidential administration that claims to defend democracy. In many states, we still have doors open to us if we want to expand our collections and organize library programs that promote critical thinking. And I really hope that we take advantage of all the opportunities that we still have. I look forward to your questions, your comments, your suggestions. We have 8 minutes left.
Getting a few thank yous in the chat. We did have one particular thank you from Alejandra saying that they were glad that this topic was available and that they think we need to analyze this trend in Latin America now more than ever, that they're so proud to be a Spartan, and thanks to SJSU, and they wanted to say greetings from Nicaragua, that they're a proud alumni of San Jose State. So thanks so much, Alejandra, for your comment.
Thank you, Alejandra.
Another comment from Rebecca saying that this was really interesting and that they have a whole list of books to read now.
Great.
Sarah wants to know, is there an audiobook version of your book?
No, not yet. I hope soon, but not yet. Not yet.
We'll keep a lookout for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's available as an ebook, but not in addition to a print copy, but no, not audiobook yet. But I think if you get the, if you can get the ALA webinars, you know, I discuss a lot of the concepts that are in my book in those webinars. So unfortunately, you have to pay for that, but maybe your institution will pay for it. But of course, the study guide is completely free.
Alejandra, I think the link to all the slides will be available after the presentations are over, along with the recording on the Library 2.0 website.
Here, I'll go back to the link that had the program and collection development ideas in case that helps.
Awesome. Jen wants to know, could you comment on the feminist and socialist approaches to action and what lessons librarians can take from those approaches?
You mean what type of action? In terms of our action as librarians?
Let's see if Jen follows up. Actions meaning social change in general.
Okay, well, I think that we as librarians are in a really great position to promote social change, because we are able to offer ideas, and we are able to offer people ways of connecting with history, and we're able to help them think critically. So I think that's the first thing that we need to do as librarians, to keep thinking of creative ways of having discussions at libraries and programs that make people think even if it's something as simple as having a current world events discussion group, where a librarian takes responsibility for reading the New York Times on a regular basis and maybe picking an article once a week to discuss, or New York Times and on some other newspapers that are reputable, and discussing the issues of the day and really confronting the disinformation and the confusion. So I think that's the first step when it comes to action, helping people think critically and helping to connect people to history and to the world of ideas that are emancipatory. For instance, what about having a dialogue on this issue of reproductive rights? Or for instance, what is one of the ideas that I suggested in my study guide and also in the webinar, the discussion on the concept of life. Why are we letting the right take over the concept of life? There's so much that we as feminists can say about what life means and what life with dignity means, which is what the reproductive justice movement argues for. So what about a discussion on that?
Rebecca adds, I think also programming that helps people slow down. Everything is so fast now. Slowing down is the first step to reflection and conversation.
Absolutely. I used to have philosophy study groups at the library where I worked for 10, 12 years. I used courses from the teaching company to have philosophy discussion groups, and they were very popular and very well attended. That can help people slow down and think.
Thank you for the suggestion too of a program. That was something I was actually going to ask too, is if you had any, I know you have a link, but if there was any particular programming that you had done or participated in that you felt was really effective or really helpful. So I appreciate you going into a little more detail about that.
Yeah, I would say the most effective programs I've had were actually three types. Philosophy study groups by using courses from the teaching company, great courses. Current events discussion groups, discussions on gender and on African American history. Those were very, very successful.
Rebecca also added that one of her old libraries had a knitting group called Knowledge Exchange. It was a time for people to relax, talk, and create.
Excellent. Very nice. You're welcome to contact me if you have any further questions. And here is my email address, afary2nd@yahoo.com. And if you want any of the links I have in my PowerPoint, if you didn't catch them, I'd be happy to send them to you.
And I do believe all of the slides and the recording will be available on the Library 2.0 website after the presentation has completed.
Very wonderful.
Thanks so much, everybody, for attending. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Kali, is there anything that you would like to say to me before I click on leave?
No, I think we're good. Thanks again so much, everybody, for attending. I know everybody's probably gonna zip over to the closing ceremony, so we'll go ahead and dip out so that everybody can do that. But thanks again, everyone, for attending, and check the Library 2.0 website for the slides and the presentation recording.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.